Welcome to the DataFlex Launch event. I think you should be able to hear me now at the moment, because I really want to welcome you to this event because we are happy to celebrate the launch of DataFlex 2021, DataFlex Reports 2021 and Plato with you. So this is a really great online party together with all of you to celebrate this big launch. Today we want to introduce you to a new start of the DataFlex platform, and we're going to do that by showing short videos and short presentations to give you a taste of the new opportunities. And also you are able to ask your questions to our DataFlex panel. And the DataFlex panel, you can see them over here. The panel exists of André, Vincent, Bram, Dennis, Henry, Harm and Steven. So if you have any questions for these guys, don't hesitate to ask. You can send a text message, a WhatsApp or an email to the contact information linked below. So if you have any questions for these guys, they are available today. Okay, I think we should just start by the first presentation or the first short story, and that is from Chip, the president of Data Access Worldwide. Let's go to Chip.
Hello, and welcome to the DataFlex 2021 launch event. Data Access Worldwide has just released a new version of DataFlex that took 5 years of time, energy, planning, and investment to build. We're very excited about the result, and from the feedback that we're getting from our community, from many of those of you who are with us today, you're excited about it too. So it's a great time to get together, celebrate this release, learn more about it, and go forward and build great software in the future. DataFlex 2021 is the foundation of the product's future. It begins a new era. The changes have been done very carefully at the very core of the product. They're well architected, they're carefully tested, they're designed to be flexible and durable for the future, as well as to deliver excellent performance. But even with the degree of change that we've delivered in DataFlex 2021, a great deal of attention has been paid to make sure that we've maintained the continuity and compatibility that will let you take your applications forward with the least possible effort. Our goal with the launch event is to update you about the latest things that have been added to DataFlex 2021, some of which you may not be aware of because they came in at the very end of the project. There's so much to tell, but there's not much time to tell it. So we will not be repeating any of the content that's been delivered in past presentations and events, but we will be providing you with an index, a catalog of the different materials that have been presented in the past, so you have a full library of resource material referencing DataFlex 2021. DataFlex 2021 is a great product. Data Access Worldwide's culture and our competence is technical. We build excellent, durable software so that developers can do the same thing with their applications. But the world needs to know more about this great product. To help us understand ourselves better and to define excellent marketing communication strategies, we have engaged a man who is an expert in these specific areas. And rather than us trying to explain to you what he has told us, we thought it would be fun to kick off the event today by having him join us and tell you what he has learned about Data Access Worldwide, about DataFlex, and how he feels we should be communicating about it in the future. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you as the next presenter, Art and Creative Director, Robert Dirksen. He will show you his conclusions about DataFlex and the company, and share with you some of his creative ideas of how we should be positioning and marketing DataFlex in the future. And you will be seeing some of these things from us not too far down the road. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to building great software with you for a long time into the future.
Hi, my name is Robert Dirksen, and I work as a freelance advertising creative and art director. It's my job to find the essence in things and strip them to the bare minimum. From there on, I build brands from the ground up. My outputs can be everything. TV ads, websites, creative PR plans, brand stories, integrated campaigns, social campaigns, you name it. I'm doing this now for more than 20 years for a wide variety of clients and different industries. And since 2017, Data Access Worldwide is one of them. Back then, I turned this into this. The new logo was part of the style guide you're still using today. The next years we stayed in touch and it made me get a better understanding of the company Data Access, the product DataFlex and the people behind it. In 2019 we had lots of talks about the company and the product. I spent time with people working at Data Access and I spent many hours trying to understand what's so great about DataFlex. I came up with several metaphors and none of them were right. Last year I officially got the assignment to write the brand foundations for Data Access and build towards a campaign for DataFlex. Together with the style guide, this should form a brand book. And some companies even refer to it as the brand Bible. A Bible guides a company and makes decisions regarding the brand much easier. In the meantime, DataFlex came up with a proposition for DataFlex, Lean Code. And I will tell you more about that later. When I started my presentation, this was the introduction slide, the odd man out. It was not meant as an insult, it was just me summarizing my findings on Data Access. I've worked with lots of companies, but I never saw a group of people like you. When I first entered your office, it was kind of underwhelming. No flat screens, no art, no fancy coffee machine. Where was the hipster dude on the skateboard? But it had something cozy, something warm and something familiar. And the people, they were nice, actually nice. I listened to your history and your approach on software, which was exciting and sober at the same time. I looked at pictures of events and I saw movies of the company's parties. I looked at weird memorabilia on some desks. I listened to anecdotes and I tried to understand your humor. So, the odd man out. These were my objectives. Define the DataFlex brand, define our brand story and personality, incorporate lean code in the story, develop an umbrella for campaign guidance, develop a visual language for DataFlex campaigns. From all the knowledge I gathered, it was now my job to make a killer brand and a ditto campaign. I did some first attempts and just to see for me if it could work. But every time I read or looked at something, I came to the conclusion that something was wrong. It did not fit the company. I was lying, I was covering up something. I was covering up the truth. And the truth is that you aren't flashy developers riding Teslas, drinking complicated coffees. I needed to embrace this truth and turn it into our strongest asset. Here is how I think the brand should present itself. First, the core values. The core values of DataFlex are that we believe that software development should not be expensive, difficult or time-consuming. We really try to solve problems for the client, not only with developing DataFlex, but also with a learning center. We have a community that actually helps each other. Then, drive. What is the drive behind DataFlex? We see code-intense applications that have taken years of experience and lots of money to build. More recently, we see low-code implementations. They're easy and quick to get started with, but they are difficult to customize over the long term. We think we can do better. How do we do it? We have our own view on coding. We believe in the best of both worlds. We don't look at others, we look at our users and the end result. That's what we did in the past and that's what we will always do. I also defined the brand values of DataFlex. First, we are result-driven. We want developers to achieve their goals fast and we want businesses to blossom. Second, we are reliable. We are here since 1976 and we will be here for all your future projects. If you're stuck, we can offer you quality support. We strive for long-term relationships. We're flexible. Our software, our code, our people, we're as lean as can be. And we're quirky. We are different from all the other languages you know, but we're still familiar, so it's in a good way. To sum it all up, we get it done with Lean Code by DataFlex. Lean Code, yes, I promised to come back to that. Lean code is an invention by the data access team. I kind of liked it from the beginning. It's not code intense, it's not low code, it's lean. It works the way you want it to work. It lets you drag and drop, but it also is there when you want it to code yourself. And I find it intriguing, it's Google worthy. Lean code is the power behind DataFlex. It will even become part of our payoff. In the creative campaign, we want to address everybody. Developers, CEOs, CFOs, they all have questions. And from now on, we have one answer. Yes, Lean code can. It's the answer to every possible question. Can I build great apps with a not so great budget? Lean code can. Don't want to put too much effort in learning a new code? Lean code can. You want your app to be finished yesterday? Lean code can. In the future, you might see a lot more of Lean code can, but I want to end this talk with you with the brand story. We are the quirky kid in the world of code, the nerd amongst nerds. We're not flashy, we're not mainstream. But when you get to know us, you will love us. You'll love our flexibility, our freedom, and our speed. We're here for the performers, the go-getters, the achievers, and the by any means believers. We'll make developers look good and businesses bloom. We're lean and we're here to get it done. DataFlex, the power of lean code. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope to see you someday in real life. Bye-bye.
So now we know who to blame for the very orange appearance of DataFlex the last couple of years. We really believe in the concept of lean code, and you will see a lot more of it in the future. Remember that you can still send in your questions for the DataFlex panel. So if you have any questions for the panel, you can use the contact information that's linked below. Let's go to the next short presentation, and this is from Steve Mealy. He will paint the new DataFlex landscape for you. So let's go to Steve Mealy.
Hi, I'm Stephen Mealy, and I'm here to talk about the DataFlex 2021 landscape. DataFlex 2021 is released, everybody's super excited, and everybody's coming down to the same real question, what do I do now? Well, as I said in my little intro, the answer is different for all of us because we're not all starting from the same place and we're not all going to the same destination. So what could you do? What would you do now? Okay, you could download and install the 2021 Studio, point it at a workspace, and see what happens. And that's a thing. You can certainly do that. How well that goes might depend upon a lot of things, but hey, I can't say I haven't done it. Or you could take a more planned approach and prepare yourselves for the journey, because sometimes surprises are fun and sometimes less so. And especially when you're dealing with, your business, I think having a little bit more nuanced approach and a planned approach might at least keep more of your hair or more of it not gray. And more than ever, it's important to understand the landscape. Even if you're gonna, throw caution to the wind, at least if you understand where the choices are and how wide the landscape is, it might, save some of your sanity. All right, so, it all comes down to the journey of where are you starting? Are you new to DataFlex? Are you an experienced developer? Is it a new project? Are you current or reasonably current? And I used 18.x as an example, but depending upon the types of things that you used in your application, you might be current but on a slightly older, or you might be on a relatively new revision but still have pretty legacy code because you didn't upgrade it a lot over the years. Are you using the embedded database or SQL drivers? An interesting thing here is, a lot of people think, oh, well, SQL, Unicode capable. So if I'm already in SQL, I'm ready to go for Unicode. Well, maybe not so. What you'll find, and you'll see me go off into the documentation a lot during this presentation, is even if you're using SQL, you can't necessarily assume that the SQL is capable for Unicode. Either you might have to change data types, or you might have to actually do something to the entire database. And we actually went through and documented all of the things that you should consider of, depending upon the situation that you're in, the server that you're using, what you might have to do, how you can set up and test for the different environments, and all of the different items that you're going to run across as you move to Unicode. Are you current or legacy in your frameworks and classes? You can have DataFlex applications that are running in 19.1 but are still using all of the old frameworks and classes. And just being in 19.1 isn't going to really be much of a comfort to you, depending upon how legacy your code is. Are you using DataFlex pretty much out of the box? Are you using a lot of third-party or custom components? With us, our development community has been around for so long, and DataFlex applications have been serving their customers for so long that we often forget that we're using pieces that we got from another developer 5 years ago or 10 years ago or longer. So I've seen people, as they try and migrate to 2021, say, I forgot that I was even using that component. Well, yeah, that's because it's been doing its job so well for so many years. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. The bottom line is the more you've kept up to date over the years with revisions, with techniques, the more direct your path through DataFlex 2021 will be. So, and then where are you going? Not everybody has the same desires of what they need out of DataFlex 2021, either initially or even eventually. Is Unicode a requirement? Well, if Unicode is a requirement, we have beautiful sections that explain everything you need to know about Unicode, how it works, how the different character encodings are happening differently in DataFlex 2021. It's all right there. If Unicode is on your radar, you need to read this section of the documentation. It's going to let you understand what you're up for. Is 64-bit requirement? Again, we have 64-bit in DataFlex. All kinds of wonderful tips, pointers, exactly how the language has changed between 32 and 64. Some things that maybe you weren't even expecting to need to know. The alignment within structs of when you're dealing with the external interfaces of Windows, sometimes the alignment within structs are different between 32 and 64-bit. It surprised us when we first got there, so it might surprise you too. Again, tons of great information in the documentation, and if you look at it ahead of time, you won't be shocked. You'll just be ready for, oh yeah, I know I need to deal with that. The documentation told me how to do it. You may just be getting or staying current. I don't really care about Unicode. I don't really care about 64-bit. I just want to be on the latest version of DataFlex so that anytime I see something that I want to use, anytime somebody's discussing something in the forums and I say, oh yeah, I want to do that too, I don't go, oh, but I'm not using the latest, so I can't. So sometimes it's just getting and staying current. And then you may just want to experiment. And if you are one of those people that, I'm not ready to move, but I want to check it out, I want to play, there's a great document in there if you're going to experiment. It's called Working with DataFlex 2021. And it basically takes you step by step. All you really need is to install the studio. You've got the examples right there, and we tell you exactly what to do. And you'll get a good feel for how the studio works between 32 and 64-bit, how Unicode comes in, what you need to do to an SQL database, in the case of this particular document, MS SQL, to allow it to use Unicode. What happens when it's not Unicode capable? What will you see? So there's all kinds of really great information in the doc that will teach you how to do that, even if all you're doing is experimenting. So what we're really saying is plan your route. Well, you don't have to, but excuse me. We probably all watch our the next generation get in the car, punch in a distant location that they've never been to, and just trusting that this thing's going to get them there, and it will eventually. But will it get you there in the most safe route, or the most efficient route, or even with your sanity completely intact, or what's left of it? Well, that could be interesting. So instead of just doing that, why don't you do some other things? Why don't you study, or at least peek at the map? And we've given you the map. You've got the what's new is right there. It takes you step by step, excuse me, through everything. Unicode and 64-bit, all the changes to the web framework, all the changes to connectivity, all the changes to the web app server, the dark theme in your development environment, general improvements to the language, what's in the examples, all of the different changes as they happen throughout the project. So from the alpha phases to the beta phases to the release candidate, and now to release. So, that map is there, and if you just take a look at it, it will really help. Again, run through working with DataFlex 2021. I already referred to this for experimenters, but if you go more deeply into this and go down past the experimentation phase, then you run into the section of migrating your own applications. And it takes you, again, step by step through, depending upon what you're doing and how you're doing it, the issues that you may need to know more about, and how to deal with them. So, I mean, this is really great stuff. And I've always liked the level of information that we've put into the what's new, but I think we really did a super job. The team came together and really said, okay, we really want to make this as easy and as seamless as we can. There's a lot of stuff in there, and there's a lot of things that you're going to need to deal with, but forewarned is forearmed, as they say. Inventory your components. For every library, third party, or custom component, determine if there's already a 20 capable version available, or again, go back to the documentation and study what might happen. If you're using external functions to talk to the Windows environment, or other pieces, look at how that's going to be impacted by 32, 64-bit differences, or language changes that now you need to deal with the wide APIs instead of the standard ANSI APIs. It's all in there. You just kind of go through step by step and see what you're going to run into. Ask for directions. Of course, as a lot of us men have been saddled with the reputation for years that men never ask for directions. Probably relatively true. But in this case, asking for directions is really talking to your fellow developers. You've got so many people out there that have been dealing with DataFlex 2021 from the very first technology preview. The DataFlex community is extremely helpful. If you ask, they'll help. Sometimes they'll write code for you. It's really amazing. And in the forums, they're very, very welcoming and mostly non-judgmental. But we sometimes tend to have fun with each other. But get in there and see what's going on. Many companies, including us, offer consulting services, and you think about consulting services and you go, oh my God, I don't want you to do my whole big project. Well, sometimes consulting services can just be as simple as, let's spend a couple of hours in a GoToMeeting or Teams chat and just talk about what you're doing and the things you might run into. We do that all the time, and it's really been helpful, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Break up the trip. Start with doing just a basic migration. I always say, take your entire workspace and all the libraries, make a copy of it so that you're not anywhere near the stuff that you're currently getting paid for, and do a basic migration. Do a migration in place, see what happens. Compile 32-bit. Don't worry about 64. Don't worry about Unicode. Use the compiler warning system to see the entire landscape, and the compiler warning system is going to be your friend. Excuse me. There's this whole compiler warning system. If you kind of jumped over 19.1, a lot of this is going to be new to you, but basically it allows you to control what the compiler tells you about for all the different types of changes that we've made in the language over the years. Ambiguous functions, Unicode unsafe commands, obsolete global functions, the using indicate instead of the move command, using local, all these different things that have changed over the years, and the compiler warning system will guide you through all of them. And the cool thing about it is, and this is a change for those of you that use the 19.1 system, it's a little bit different in 20 because now you basically say, I want them all, or I want them all off, and then I just want these on, or these on, or these on. So you can actually turn each one of those sections that we looked at on by themselves. You can turn all of them off and then 2 or 3 of them on. So you can really tune exactly what the compiler is going to tell you at any time. It's a great tool. I really love the way it's worked out so far. Defer unnecessary side trips at the start. There's a lot of times that we want you to go and explore some of the new things that we've put in there, but when you're just trying to do your initial migration, that's not the time to say, oh, and now I'm going to put in this new feature. Yeah, we want you to put in those new features, but not necessarily right at the beginning. Stop and smell the roses. There are a lot of things that you're going to need to do when you're traveling from point A to point B, but take advantage of being on a trip. There's, when you're going to be on a trip, you're in a different mindset. When you're going to be migrating and experimenting with a new revision of the product, you're in a different mindset. It's not that same, oh, I got to fix this bug, I got to deal with this customer, I got to do this thing, I got to write this doc. Take a little bit of time and stop and say, hey, now that I'm looking at this, now that I'm looking at my code with different eyes, let me check this out again. Let me review that what's new and see all the things that maybe I bypassed as I went from rev to rev to rev, because we don't do everything. And basically every journey begins with a single step. So even if your needs or your timeline is fluid, the momentum in the developer community is building now, and it's going to start to build even greater now that it's released. There's a lot of developers that don't get involved until we hit release status. So knowledge is more readily acquired and more readily shared during this big initial push of the developer community to get onto DataFlex 2021. So even if you can't get started right away, don't put off the trip until long after everybody else is gone. You'll feel a little bit more alone, and there'll be less time for everybody else to go, yeah, I just hit that myself, and I did this, and it worked great. So again, you can jump in the car and just put your foot on the gas and go, or you can take a little time, plan that trip, look at the map, ask for directions. We're here and we're excited, and it's been wonderful to talk about the DataFlex landscape. Enjoy your journey. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. And we have some questions from the DataFlex panel. The first one is, the Wikipedia article on LeanCode does not mention DataFlex. Well, that's one I will answer. That's true, it does not mention DataFlex yet, but it's a good theme to talk about with a beer. And maybe if you have registered as a VIP, you can join the VIP lounge and we can discuss this topic. But good to notice is that LeanCode does not necessarily mean least code. But we want to talk to you about it. If you registered as VIP, we will see you in the chat. And then we'll go to the next question. The question is, DataFlex Windows application feel left behind? Will it get some more love for the next rev? Let's go to Stephen. Will it get more love in the next rev?
More love for Windows in the next rev. We know that, as a matter of fact, someone had mentioned it in the forum the other day that it seemed that Windows wasn't getting a lot of love. But there's really two, when you look at Windows, there's two segments. There's what we do to the product in general. All the language changes, 64-bit, Unicode, those things are all Windows as well. We tend to show them off with web apps, but it's all in Windows. So everything that's the underpinning of DataFlex is in there already. But I think what the question is really is, are the UI components, are the classes going to get some love next rev? And we are absolutely looking for ways to improve the user interface capabilities of Windows applications going into the next rev.
Okay, that's great. So love is coming Windows' way. Next question. In addition to the 64-bit and Unicode support, there are a lot of fixes in SQL driver in 2021. Is there any chance that the 6.3 drivers will be updated? Well, Stephen, I think this is a question for you as well.
Why not? Actually, that's a really good question. If you look at all of the changes that have been happening in the drivers, a lot of them are making sure that they work better with certain backends like Postgres and MySQL and things like that. And what we're doing is we're taking, if you put the 64-bit and Unicode aspects aside, we're taking those improvements and bug fixes and we are backporting them into the 6.3 code. We actually did that about a month or two ago, and we're testing that now, and we hope to be releasing an update to the 6.3 drivers relatively soon.
Okay, great. So it's coming your way relatively soon. Then we don't have any questions for this moment, but if you have any questions, you can still send them in for the DataFlex panel using the contact information linked below. Now we're going to a presentation of someone that has some experience in using the new DataFlex already. Let's listen to Peter van Meel practicing his Japanese.
Max フェルスタッペンは素晴らしいホンダエンジンを搭載した次の F1 世界チャンピオンになります。
This is a Japanese command in one of my databases. What are you talking about?
Max Verstappen will be the next F1 world champion with a great Honda engine.
Okay, well, I am Peter van Meel. I live in the Netherlands and I am an independent DataFlex developer. Last year I was working on a demo for a large financial company in Austria. They are active in 50 countries and one of the most important markets is Japan. The demo is built with DataFlex 2021 and SQL Server 2019. In the customer database I store Japanese names and addresses. I Googled for real company names and it just works. It works in Windows and web. I also made a small demo with DataFlex Reports 2021. I'm able to print Japanese customer names and items. I'm also able to add Japanese labels and text boxes. If I want, I can create real Japanese invoices. The key to all this is Unicode. Maybe this is less important in the US or the UK, but in our country we are doing business worldwide and our applications has to support it. A bill of lading for Russia has to be in Russian. And it has to be very precise, otherwise your goods got stuck at the border. Export documents to China has to be in Chinese, and your application has to block words like made in Taiwan, otherwise they get very furious. In the past I've been working on a medical application. Patients from Eastern Europe were often disappointed when their names were written without those funny accents. I can imagine that. And think of that Japanese shop owner. Would you pay an invoice if only the total amount is written correctly? With DataFlex 2021 we can create real international applications and I'm looking forward to work on it.
Thank you very much, Peter. I wanted to say this in Japanese, but I guess it's better if I don't. A very important thing in DataFlex 2021 is Unicode. And DataFlex 2021 makes Unicode easy, even the complex side of it. DataFlex offers a standard solution, normalization, and Harm will talk about it and show you more about normalization. Let's go to Harm.
Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about normalization. Normalization is a very broad concept that's available in a lot of different fields and areas. When you look up normalization on Wikipedia, you get this quote. Normalization refers to a process that makes something more normal or regular. What immediately pops out is that normal and regular are of course very subjective. And somebody has to define what is normal or regular, because normal for me doesn't have to be normal for you. Within IT, normalization is usually about the format of data, about making data uniform and formatting in a specific manner. Of course, we all know database normalization, which is a set of rules that defines how you should model your relational database. You have the different normal forms that get more specific and get rid of redundant data more and more. But we are going to be talking about normalization and Unicode. And basically you could see Unicode by itself as a way of normalizing your data. It's a standard that defines how characters are represented in memory and across different platforms. So basically Unicode could be seen as normalization. But within Unicode there is also a thing called normalization, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first I'll try to do a Unicode in a nutshell to remind you all of what Unicode actually is. So Unicode is a standard for encoding, representing and processing text. And basically its goal is to mix multiple languages into a single application. And what they did is they basically assigned unique identifiers to each character of each language that's available. Currently they have identified over more than 140,000 symbols, and they actually have space for 1.1 million symbols, so they have enough room for the future. Within Unicode you have different encodings, and an encoding is basically the format in which you store those code points. So the code points are the same across all the different encodings, it's just how they are stored in memory. And with UTF-8 a code point is split into code units of 1 byte. So a character is either 1 byte, 2 bytes, 3 bytes or 4 bytes. Within UTF-16 a code point is split into code units of 2 bytes. So a character or a code point is basically 2 bytes or 4 bytes. And with UTF-32 a code point doesn't have to be split up at all. What I always like to show when I talk about Unicode is a website called unicodetable.com, which basically shows you this index of all these different code points that are available. So this is Unicode table, and what you see down here is basically it describes all the different characters that are available, starting with the ASCII set that we probably all know for a long time. And if you scroll down you see that the characters keep coming and coming. And basically it tells you about this specific area of the Unicode set where these characters are used. For example, this is Cyrillic, so that's used in Russian, Ukrainian and Bulgarian. But if you scroll further down you get to Arabic, which is used in a different areas. If you click on the symbol you get more information, and you can even drill down to a page that shows you the name of the symbol and the identifier. The identifier is usually shown as a hex string. And if you want to see the actual number, you see down here how it's defined as an integer. All right, enough about Unicode like that. Let's talk about Unicode in DataFlex. DataFlex 2021 is fully Unicode. That means that we have chosen to represent strings as UTF-8 in memory, so that's the default encoding. And then all the components around that use their own encoding or also use UTF-8. For example, the web is usually UTF-8, while Windows applications usually use UTF-16 when displaying characters on the screen. If you store data in the database, it's either it's passed to the driver as UTF-8, and then it's either converted to OEM, ANSI, UTF-8, or UTF-16. So normalization. Normalization begins with the fact that within Unicode there are characters that are made up of multiple code points. These are so-called composed characters. And this is commonly used for diacritics and things like that, but there's also languages where they are used a lot. The thing with this is that these characters can be represented in different ways. So if we look at this string, the word astrom, I don't know what it means, just an example that I took from somewhere, but you see that the A can be represented by 1 code point, but it can also be 2 code points. If you look down there, you see the A can be a combination of multiple code points. So if you look at the image down below, you see that you have the A with the separate combining ring above, or you get the Latin capital letter A with the ring above as a single code point. I created a little test program to demonstrate this within DataFlex. It's a web application and it's a view within a web order mobile that's converted to SQL. So if I open it up. I end up at the dashboard, and now I can go to my specific view. And here we see we have an edit on the left and an edit on the right. And basically we can now click buttons that is going to do things with these strings. And we see the two different versions of Astrom being shown. So if I click debug code points, what it now does is it shows us the different code points of the different strings down here. And if I copy one to the other, we see that now it shows them the same. Let me refresh the page. Now they are back to the different versions of the same string. And what's interesting is there's a button called string compare. And if I click that, it tells us that Astrom equals Astrom, which is kind of true because it's the same word. But if we do a binary compare, of course, it tells us that they are different. And now the difficulty becomes, what if you're going to search in this string? And for that, I created a button that basically searches for string 2 in string 1. And that results in 0, which basically means that it didn't find the string. And I can demonstrate this further by changing data to. If I do a pause, it still shows 0. But if I now copy this O, which is the single character O, it shows us that it's at position 5. And basically the same thing for contains. Now contains works, but if it's the separate O, contains will not work. So this demonstrates that Unicode has different ways of representing the same string. And well, in some languages that's more common, in some languages that doesn't happen a lot. It also depends on where the data comes from. And to get these different kinds of strings, I had to copy paste things from the internet. I didn't know how to type all these characters. But when you use the alt code, you usually get the single character version. So how does this affect things? Well, searching inside strings with these special characters is not always 100% reliable. So pos and contains will not find a different version of that same string. Yet if you use string comparisons, these strings will be considered equal. And the reason for that is that string comparisons can also compare if a string is bigger than or smaller than a string for sorting them, for example with sort array. And to do this, it uses the ICU collating logic. And this logic rules out the differences in these characters. And the same thing happens when you try to store it in a database and you have a unique index defined. At least on MS SQL, it will consider both versions of Astrom to be the same, and it will not allow you to create two records with that same unique key. There is a way to get around it, and that's called normalization. And normalization basically is the process of pulling apart that string, and you have 4 different ways of normalizing your string that are defined by the Unicode standard. But the most important one is NFD. NFD basically pulls your character apart and puts it in the longest possible form with a specific order. And NFC basically takes it apart and then pulls it back together to make it the shortest possible form. So that will basically give you the single character version. And that's the standard way of normalizing. And then there's 2 compatibility versions, and well, I don't really know what they do, but it's these interfaces are also exposed in DataFlex, and that is in the form of a function called normalized string. Normalized string has been added in the release candidate and will be in the final release. And basically you pass it a string, which form you want to normalize it. If you leave it out, it will just use the standard, and that gives you back the normalized string. So if I go back to my little test program, and I refresh the page, I do debug code points, we see the 2 different versions of that same string. And now if I normalize my second string, we see that before it was the long version, and now it's the short version. And now if I click binary compare, it will tell me that both strings are the same. And I can also see that if I click debug code points, we see that it's the same for both strings. If I now select NFD and click normalize data to, we see that it goes back to the long version. And so if I click debug code points, we see that they're both different. And now binary compare will say that they are different, while string compare still sees them as the same. So this is the normalization topic in DataFlex. This came up pretty late in the release cycle, so that's why we added this function, but we're not using it by default yet. We might do that in the next revision. What I also think is important to know is what do the string functions in DataFlex do? Are they working with characters, code points, or code units? And the short answer is all the string processing functions in DataFlex use code points. And that is actually consistent with most other programming languages that are out there. So for example, if you use pos, it interprets the numbers that you pass into it, or the result will be a code point. Left work with code points, mid, length. Length gives you back the number of code points in your string. And ASCII gives you back a code point. So if you have a character that's made up of multiple code points, you pass it to the ASCII function, you just get the code point of the first code point in the string. Size of string and size of W string are explicitly different, and they give you back the number of code units of your string. And that's why size of W string is different than size of string, because in UTF-16 the number of code units can be different. And then we have UCHAR to array and UCHAR to wide string, or UCHAR array to string and UCHAR array to wide string, and those always work with bytes. So that's basically the exceptions. So if we look at this whole thing, well, Unicode makes your application truly multilingual, and it's really the way to go. Everything is going there. All the software will be Unicode at some point, hopefully. But it doesn't make everything easier. That's one thing that we have to realize. People were complaining in the past with all these different code pages and conversions. Well, within Unicode, you still have different encodings, and you even have this thing of strings being able to be represented in different ways. So that's going to stay. And we think that DataFlex 2021 will provide a stable foundation for getting us into the Unicode world. And of course, we will make refinements in future revisions if that's necessary. But I think DataFlex 2021 is a very good step in getting there. So thank you for your time, and hope to see you again soon.
Okay, thank you, Harm. And we have received some questions for the DataFlex panel. So let's go to the panel again. The first question is, will the GDI Plus library be updated to 2021 as well? And when will this happen? Let's go to Vincent. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, it will be updated. I'm working on it, but the release of that is not scheduled yet. Sorry.
Okay, but it is coming.
It's coming.
It is coming,
sure.
And we will update you. Do we have a next question? Yes. Should the embedded tables web app server props also be upgraded for Unicode? Harm, can you tell us more?
Since the embedded database does not support Unicode, you can still use it to store OEM data, but doesn't support Unicode. That also means that the web app server props and the web app session tables and web app user should be converted to SQL to make it work with Unicode. And actually, if you use the conversion wizard of the Studio or database builder, it will automatically convert it to the right field types, especially when using MS SQL. It will use the nvarchar fields, which are the best for those tables. So.
Okay. Okay. Let's see if we have any more questions. At this moment, yes, there is one question. Which database has the best Unicode support? So which database? Stephen, which one has the best Unicode support?
Okay, so you had to ask me that one. Great.
Yeah.
It's kind of like asking a parent that has a lot of children, who's your favorite?
Well, who is your favorite, Stephen?
There's no good answer, but I will say this. What you end up, it's kind of like also trying to figure out, who's the best football team. It's every database that we support has Unicode support in it. What you have to do, like if you are very familiar with MySQL, you're going to be comfortable with the changes that you have to use for it. If you're more familiar with MS SQL, you're going to be comfortable there. I have most experience with MS SQL, so that's my, dance with the one that brung you. And I think you don't have to do anything at the database or table level. It's all changes at the data type level for fields. So I like the way MS SQL handles things, but you can use any one you want, and there's documentation in the product that tells you what you need to do for each one of those options. So if you're not sure, just go look at there and you can say, oh, okay.
So your favorite is MS SQL, but you can read about any database in the documentation.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that was the last question. Yeah, that was the last question. Okay, so if you have any more questions for the panel, then just ask your question, send it to the WhatsApp, text message, or an email. For now, we will go to the next presentation, and that is about the DataFlex styler. We released this graphic design tool in 2016, and in 2021, it got a major overhaul, and Dennis will tell you more about it.
Hi, I'm Dennis Piccioni from Data Access Worldwide, and I'm going to show you the new and improved Web App Styler. We've added a number of features for the launch of 20.0, and I'm going to show you those now. This is the styler as you've probably seen it in the past. You could choose a style and then apply a color, make a few color settings, and the gradients and shades would be automatically applied for you, so you could create a theme with the colors of, for example, your company. For 20.0, we've made a few improvements for material styles. You can choose 20.0 material or 19.1 material style, and you will see that we have some new options. For example, you can change fonts. Let's change the text font to something different and the data font to something different. Now, you'll see it here. Now, I'm not a designer, so this is not going to be pretty, but it demonstrates all of the features you can now play around with. You can also, if you make any mistakes, since we have so many sections now, you can just reset those to the default for any section. We've made some improvements for lists and grids. You can play around with grids, make any changes, see exactly what those features look like with the chosen modifications you've applied. You can also look at a list instead of a grid and toggle back and forth. And for example, you can change the grid to have a solid border. Now you're going to see that the border hasn't been applied. That's because we haven't selected a border yet. So if you say solid and all sides have a solid border, make it a little bit wider so it's easier to see, and you'll see that there's a border around the grid now. You can do the same thing with rows. I'm going to actually remove the borders, top and bottom borders of the grid, so that the row borders for the are easier to see. Set them to dashed. Make them a little wider so you can see them, and there you go. You can also add padding to any of these. say, make the column have padding of 3 all the way around, and you can set, let's set a data border for the cells, and you can see each cell has a dotted border around it. Again, if we make it a little bit larger, it's easier to see it. Not very pretty though, so let's set it back. You can also change controls, and you'll see as you change sections, the preview view will change accordingly. So it shows you the things that you're actually working on, the features that you're working on right now. Here in controls, for example, you can change the width. Again, you can change the border style, border color. You can even change the radius, which makes the borders a little bit curved on the corners. Change the height of the control. Text color. And again, you can reset everything to the default if you'd like to. You can also preview how all of this looks. Buttons. You can change buttons to have border style, no border style. Again, you can change the height, you can change the radius, change the back color. So there are a lot of things that you can now change and create a theme just the way you like it. Okay, so let's create a new style. I'm going to start with the default of green. And I think the main colors, variations, and shades are pretty good. There's probably nothing I can personally do better. Let's change the font to, let's do Bookman old style. Make the text font a little larger. The title font a little larger. Data font a little larger. Change the lists and grids to have a solid border. Oops. Around the outside. Let's make row, top, and bottom be dashed. Width of 2. And let's do the side borders of cells to be dotted. And I think padding is fine. Let's make the controls border style be none. Oh, that's the width for the border. Since I set it to none, that's not going to do anything. Change the height to be a little larger. A little bit more of a curve to the edge. Change the text color to, well, how about a very dark green? Is there a darker one I can use? Yeah. And the background color to a very light green. Then the buttons, we also want to match in green. I think the text is probably fine. Maybe yellow matches more with green. Well, make the buttons a little larger, a little rounder, and I think we're good to go. Now we can download the theme, call it my custom theme. Now we're going to open the theme up here. We're going to copy it into the web order mobile sample. It goes under CSS themes. I'm going to paste it here. I'll show you right now in another browser window I have the default theme web order mobile running. And I have web order mobile already open in the studio. We're just going to change the PSS theme property to my custom theme and recompile. Okay, and refresh, and we have our new theme. You'll see all of the changes were applied, that we had applied. And voila. And thank you. You can access the web app styler at styler.dataaccess.eu.
Always look respectable.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And again, we have some questions for the panel. So let's go to the DataFlex panel. The first question we have is, how did you stop the controls on the left side of the styler from changing when a style is changed? Dennis, this one is for you, I think. How did you do that?
Yeah, we set custom CSS classes using the PS CSS class property for that, and put those in application.css so that those remain static.
Okay, so it's custom CSS.
Yes.
Okay, let's see if we have another question. When will the new styler be available for use? Of course, Dennis, when will it be available?
Soon. We didn't lock down a date yet because we want to make sure it's we get it exactly right, but it'll be very soon.
Okay, so also the styler will come your way soon. Let's see if we have another question. I can't see this question properly. Yeah, there is a question. Should I wrap WriteLine with a macro to support legacy exporting of text files that needs to be in OAM? Harm. This
Yes.
sounds like a question for you. Let's see.
Yeah. Let me pick this up. Well, basically I can start by, probably the best answer is to explain how it works. We didn't change actually anything on WriteLine. So WriteLine doesn't do anything with your character encoding. It didn't do it before and it doesn't do it now. So whenever you call it with UTF-8, with a string, in DataFlex 19.1, that string would usually be would be OEM, and it would write out the OEM to disk. Now with DataFlex 2021, when you call it, it doesn't do anything to the encoding of the string, but the string is now UTF-8. So by default, you're now generating UTF-8 files. So if you indeed still want to write OEM files, you're going to have to add a conversion, and for that we have a function UTF-8 to OEM. It's a new function because the old ones now have warnings because they were called to OEM, and you probably want to take them out because they do the wrong things now. But you can use UTF-8 to OEM and just convert your string, still use a string variable and write it out. And if you feel more comfortable doing that in your own macro, that's still allowed, of course. Wouldn't recommend making your own macros anymore, but you still can do that. So that's definitely an option.
Okay, thank you. For now, we will leave the questions like this, but if you have any questions, you can still send them for the DataFlex panel. So send them using the telephone number or the email address shown below. Thank you, panel. For now, we will go to Birmingham because in the UK, there's a smart group of developers who have chosen an intelligent way to migrate their set of Crystal reports to DataFlex Reports 2021. Let's go to David Knowles.
Hi, I'm David Knowles from CMAC Computer Systems, and I've been developing in DataFlex for a little over 10 years now. Back in 2018, we started to look at DataFlex reports. And at the time, we had roughly 180 plus reports. The vast majority of these were Crystal, with a handful of WinPrint reports as well thrown in. We wanted to move away from Crystal, and DataFlex reports seemed like the obvious choice when it came to looking for a replacement. Originally, we planned to replace all our existing reports with direct equivalents in DataFlex. But after looking at the RDS, the runtime data source, we decided that by using a more generic table structure, and by setting the visibility of columns as well as the captions via parameters, we could potentially reduce many of these reports to a much smaller number. And in fact, in a very short period of time, we'd reduced 100 plus Crystal reports to just a handful of DataFlex reports, which were much more dynamic. These reports also gave us a degree of future-proofing, as we could add new reports in a matter of minutes via the DataFlex Studio, rather than having to go off and write a new DataFlex report each time. We've subsequently built on this framework. The original purpose of writing a more dynamic report was to aid ourselves as developers, but actually, thinking about it, it soon became apparent that this would be of great benefit to our users as well, allowing them to select which columns they wanted to appear in the report and the order, as well as grouping, creating a report wizard of sorts. We also made much use of the ability to capture when a user clicks on a field within the report previewer, allowing our users to drill down into the data and making the reports feel much more interactive. We've recently moved over to the latest release of DataFlex Reports version 8, which is now fully Unicode and can be used in a 64-bit environment, migrating all our existing reports without issue, thankfully. And I'm very much looking forward to implementing some of the new features that we see in DataFlex Reports version 8. So yeah, the future looks bright.
Thank you, David. And about DataFlex Reports, it's fully focused on 64-bit and Unicode, just like DataFlex 2021. But today, Vincent will talk about a great new feature in DataFlex Reports, and that will offer developers a great deal of flexibility and creativity. We are talking about web forms in DataFlex Reports. Let's go to the presentation of Vincent.
Hello, I'm going to talk about a new feature in DataFlex Reports. The new feature is called Web Forms. And as the name already suggests, it is targeting to the web. And it gives you more or full control over a part of the HTML previewer for web applications. What did we have in an older version? We had a hyperlink ID. The hyperlink ID was a numeric value you could enter in the field properties of a field in a report. And when the value was unequals to 0, the OCX generated HTML output containing a class and a data type attribute, as you can see in the second screenshot, outlined by the rectangle. Class drClick and data drType is equals to 1, which is the value of the hyperlink ID. What could you do with that? If you clicked that element, it fired an event at the DataFlex side of your application inside your CWeb DR report viewer object. And inside that event, the developer can write code to be executed. That code could, for example, be opening a web view to look up a customer, a product, or whatever. We already have this in action when you open the web order 19.1 example in your environment. It shows you the use of the hyperlink ID. Clicking the salesperson ID in the salesperson overview report, it navigates to the salesperson web view. And let's show that. Here you see that report. It's a web order mobile 19.1. And the report is called Salesperson Overview. And as you can see in the screen, you see 4 persons there. And the person Alina Suarez, Barney Roberts, they all have a underlined piece of text underneath them, AS, BR, BS. And if you click on one of those elements, then it will navigate to a web view showing the person. So it now navigates to a web view for Alina Suarez. You can enter, you can change the name, you can look up other information if your application does do that, but it opens a view there. Let's go back to the slide. What is new in version 8? The hyperlink ID value entry is removed. The automatically generated HTML code by the OCX is now added to an HTML code attribute in the report structure. This way, the 19.1 v7 and older technique still works as before. And the shown code, as you can see in the screenshot on the right, field properties there, is inserted in a span element in HTML structure. And you can see there span class is drClick, data type is 1. So it works as before. What's new then? The content that is placed in the HTML stream can come from this fixed code block, as shown, or it can come from a function. And the function really opens the full power to dynamically create content based on the report data. In the example that I will show next, I've added a button object in the HTML stream per detail line to open a website URL. So let's go to the browser again. And in the browser, I'm going to the other tab page. You see a report, a vendor list report. And in the vendor list report, you see a number of vendors. And behind every vendor, there is a button, Open Website. That button code there, the button representation, is generated by the report. So not by your application. If you slide over this button, you get a tooltip, which says this is the open website for ACE publications with this URL. And if I click on the button, it will execute that, and it will open a view, a web page for this company. And I can close it again, and that is for every vendor, a different website. Let's go back to the slides. The HTML code function itself starts, as usual, with a return statement. It's also shown in the picture on the right. Then we see a DataFlex reports function, which concatenates static text and values from a data source. In this case, vendor name, vendor website, etc. So it's all concatenated to each other. Where do you find this? Well, we open the report, and we see here this list of vendors. And then at the place where the button is, you see here an object. And if I right mouse click there, and I click on field properties, I get the dialog. And in the HTML tab page of this dialog, you find first here the option to enter code. But if you click this button, you can see the function code that is generated. And this is exactly what is already shown on the screenshot. The button title, the vendor name, the vendor website, and all together there is generating the HTML code. Next page. The HTML code generated looks like this. You still have that normal div element for each object in your report. Inside you will have a span element that comes from the HTML code. And inside the span element we created a button object with a title, with a style, with an on-click event, and a static text open website. That is what the code is generating. Oh, let's go there. Summary. The new web forms feature gives you more power to the web report integration than it did before. And old style reports using hyperlink ID still work. There are, of course, many other changes in the product. We only highlighted one of them. If you want to read more about the other changes, open the DataFlex Reports version 8 help and study the changes. You see there all the changes documented. And that ends my presentation, and I want to thank you for your time watching this.
Okay, thank you, Vincent. And we don't have a lot of time at the moment, but we do want to discuss one question that we've received. I have a lot of existing DataFlex. What do I have to do to migrate them to DataFlex Reports 2021 and make them Unicode capable? Vincent, I think this is the best question for you.
Yeah. Well, DataFlex Reports Developer Edition lets you install a maintenance utility, which can be used to mass migrate report definitions from an older version to the current version. To use Unicode data from a database, all you need to verify is that the ODBC driver used to talk to the server delivers the data as Unicode data. All data sources are expected to return Unicode data with, of course, exception of the DataFlex embedded database. Reports based on this database may return OEM or NZ data. So there's no OEM or NZ conversion. Another issue is the use of the 64-bit ODBC drivers, as you need to use a 64-bit capable ODBC driver when you want to use the 64-bit DataFlex reports OCX. When you need to update your reports, you can either do this at integration level or use another new feature of DataFlex reports, which is called JSON out and in. In version 8, you can save your report definition as a JSON file, perform a wildcard search and replace operation, and then import the JSON file again. Integration is normally at runtime and in memory, but version 8 also contains a save as function to update the DR files. This way you can easily update many reports as well.
Well, thank you, Vincent. For now, there are more questions, but we don't have that much time at the moment, so we will get back to that later in the live stream. And for now, we want to go on a short break, give you some time to get some coffee or maybe go to the toilet, whatever you like. This break that you will see is sponsored by our Scandinavian channel partners, and also mind the countdown, because the countdown shows when we will get back to you in the stream. Have a nice break and see you within a few minutes. Okay, great. That were some nice fish. And maybe for the EDUC attendees, you might remember them from the EDUC break as well. And I also have something fun to say, because keep on watching, because in the end, we really have a great surprise for all of you. So keep watching until the end. We have a few questions for the DataFlex panel again. Hi, panel. You're all back from the break, I see, so that's good. We have the first question. Does the DataFlex reports hyperlink also work when exporting to PDF? Vincent, I think this is a good question for you.
Oh, but let's gather at the VIP room later to discuss that.
Okay. Yeah, we will give more information about the VIP room as well later in the live stream. And then Vincent will be there to discuss some questions you have. Another question. How does Unicode influence the performance of DataFlex applications? Is it faster, slower, or is it the same? Harm, how does it affect the performance?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult question to answer because it pretty much depends on what kind of application you're building. If you're building a Windows applications, there are a lot of different conversions going on than when you're building a web application. But what's more important to understand is that before Unicode in DataFlex 19.1, we already had a lot of character conversions going on because we were OEM in a ANSI world. So we were converting between OEM, ANSI, and OEM and Unicode all the time already. Now we're just converting between different kinds of Unicode. So it's really hard to say whether it became faster or slower or the same. But yeah, my best guess would be it's pretty much the same or maybe a little bit slower.
Okay. Steven, do you agree?
Yeah.
A tiny bit?
Tiny bit.
Tiny bit slower, okay. Okay, thank you. Well, that are the questions for this moment. We will get back with more questions later in the live stream, and you can still send your questions to the telephone number and email address linked below. And for now, we want to share a story from Anderson from Brazil. So let's go to Anderson.
Hello guys, how are you? I'm glad to talk about DataFlex 2021. My name is Anderson Rodrigues from Brazil. I am my CEO of 2AA company and DataFlex lover since 1991. I am developing and supporting on-demand DataFlex web applications to a big company freight forward in Brazil, where we use DataFlex to the backend, combined with Angular 1, JSON Bootstrap on the front end, and collaborating to the international projects with DAO colleagues Jack and Bob from DAO USA and American Mauricio from DAO Brazil. I am excited to apply the new version of DataFlex. Guys, you just marked a goal, develop a new sample. I am studying the Plato and I love it. The new features will grow to the level DataFlex program behavior. The quality of the source code will great to be improved. It encourages programmers to create cleaner and more modern code. I believe that when we use the most modern language available, we are improve the performance of our application. The dark theme, it's amazing. Thank you for the opportunity for this video and success for everyone.
Okay, that was a great story of Anderson. Thank you, Anderson, for sharing this story with us. And there are a lot of DataFlex developers from Brazil that have registered for the launch, the VIP launch. So it's very nice to have all of you here at this live stream. Obrigado. I did my best, but don't know if it's the right way. Let's just continue with the live stream. We have asked some developers here at Data Access to share some of their favorite new additions to DataFlex 2021. And we'll look at a presentation from Bram and Henry where they discuss their top 5. So let's go to Henry and Bram.
Welcome to this broadcast. My name is Henry and I'm joined here today by my colleague Bram. Welcome.
Yeah, hello.
Now we've got some exciting stuff to talk about today, don't we?
Yeah, we're going to talk about the top 5 features in DataFlex 2021.
Yes, we are. Now let's kick things right off with one that you've been working on recently. It's called the WebTagsForm, I believe.
Yeah, the WebTagsForm. And as the name suggests, it's a control in which you can select multiple attributes or rather tags.
All right. And can you maybe tell me a bit more on how this came to be and what the idea behind this control is?
Yeah, so some of you already may know we have a product called HelpDesk Express, which is a ticketing system. And at some point, we are scrolling through our tickets. And well, it's just very inconvenient filtering so much different types. So we had to find a new way to do this. And one of our colleagues actually came up with the idea of a WebTagsForm. So we now can easily select, for example, products, versions, etc., which is very easy for filtering.
I believe it is. Now, I've worked with this control a little bit, and I've also noticed a show more and a create new button. Can you maybe tell me what the idea, what the philosophy behind these buttons are?
Yeah, so we actually already have the web suggestion form, of course. And one of the feedback that we've gotten is that customers don't really know whether there are actually more suggestions available to them. And so we had to find a new way to make it clear to the customers that they can actually scroll further or actually have more suggestions to them available. So we have added a more button, so you can just keep clicking on it and it will just load more suggestions as they are available in the database. And accompanied with it for the WebTagsForm is the new create new feature, which if you're not accustomed to pressing the enter key, you can just press the button.
Yeah, I can see some people would like that visual feedback. I guess it helps them for sure. Yeah.
So actually, I also heard that you have been working on the control this time.
Yes. We've got the web HTML list. Now, this is actually a control that came to be because of a necessity. We were working on a project and we needed a very stylized type of list. And we wanted to use the web list for it, but the web list didn't really allow for that much granular control over how it would look. So we actually built this as a custom control, called it the web HTML list. And we liked it so much that we decided to put it in DataFlex 2021. Now, it is based on the web list, but the difference is that it allows you to generate custom HTML templates that you can use for each row.
Okay, that's very nice. So this API, does it actually work the same as a normal web list?
Yes, it does. You still create a web list, or a web HTML list in this case, with web columns, and these web columns can have entry items, so it can be data bound, or you can use on manual load data. And you create an HTML template with curly braces that indicate placeholder tags. And these placeholder tags then get replaced with the data that is in each web column.
Yeah, so that's a lot familiar to, for example, Angular or anything like that, in which the variable name just gets replaced by something
Yes,
else.
so you create like a div, a span, and then curly braces for your placeholder tag. And then whatever is in your web column gets used at the data that is available at that time.
Yeah, very easy.
Sure. Now the beauty of this is that it allows for a very flexible design and styling approach. And I can show this to you because we use this in the application that we used for the EDUC, the last event. So in the EDUC, we had this social platform, and all these cards are actually individual rows. So we could have used a web list here and we could have stacked all the rows together, but we wanted to create a more stylized and design-oriented approach. And for that, we created these cards, and each of these cards is an individual row. Now, just like a regular web list, all these rows are actually interactable. So we can click on the row and be transported to the profile page, but we can also, as an addition, click individual elements inside each row. So we can, for example, edit this user or delete this user. So you can really get creative with the web HTML list. If you know a little bit of HTML and a little bit of CSS, you can really create beautiful stylized lists. Anyway, let's move away from web controls for a little and talk about something else. You've recently worked with the dynamic objects, and I heard that it is now part of a standard package in DataFlex 2021. Can you tell a bit more?
Yeah. So as many of you already know, the dynamic object library was already available as a library in, I believe, 1991. But now it was actually so successful that we actually added it to the standard framework. And well, as you can see to the presentation at my back, this is something I created. So it's a panel in which you can completely serialize the whole panel itself and then load it right back in. So this is just one of the many things that you can do with it, and which is very useful for example, user personalization or well, many other things actually.
Yeah, so the idea is that you would store the entire configuration for your view, for your dashboard, based on certain variables, and then using the dynamic objects library, or well, package in this case, you load it right back in, and it builds the entire view again for you. So no more hard coding your views and turning things on and off.
Completely dynamic indeed. Yeah.
Completely dynamic.
And so one of the use cases could, for example, be a web app like a social network or a blogging website, for example.
Yeah, everywhere where you have dynamic content that you don't know in advance.
Yeah, exactly.
That seems very useful. Yeah. Really seems very useful. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you like having people know where you are 24/7?
Well, not really.
Yeah, me neither. But in DataFlex 21, we can now do that. So we have the geolocation object, geolocation component. And this geolocation component uses the geolocation API from the browser to transmit GPS coordinates from the browser to the server where you can interact with those coordinates. And this allows for example, live location tracking and displaying.
Okay. Well,
scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. But now that I actually think of it, one of the useful features that I actually encountered last week was that I had to go to, I wanted to go to a new provider, faster internet, of course, like everybody does these days. And well, I actually had to fill in this postal code, and well, just to see what kind of cables are available in your current area. But now that I think of it, it would be more seamless if you could actually use something like this geolocation API and would just find your location just by your coordinates alone.
Yes, just so based on the coordinates, the browser knows where you are, sends it to the server, and based on your coordinates, it can decide, okay, you live in this region, this postal code, and these network providers are available to you.
Yeah, so that would just skip the whole fill in all your personal information.
User
because we already have it
experience.
either way.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one thing to know is that this is one of the first controls that actually works asynchronously. So when you request the coordinates, the location, you need to provide a callback function that gets called to actually process the coordinates that you get sent from the call that you send to the client. Just a small thing to keep in mind, nothing major.
Well, what is happening to this slide?
Oh, I think this one was supposed to be the dark theme, but I think I went a little too dark on this one. But yeah, in DataFlex 2021, we've added the dark theme to the studio. Now, I know that you're a big fan of this one because you work late nights often, don't you?
Yeah, indeed. And actually, well, I just want to sleep afterwards, so it's very useful to get accustomed to.
Yeah. And you also work with other editors?
Yeah, so for example, like me and you, we have to work with JavaScript. Meanwhile, so you can't really do that in the studio at this very moment. So you've got something like Atom or VS Code, which are also dark moded. So well, while switching to the existing DataFlex Studio, it would be like flashing in your eyes.
Yeah. Switching from VS Code, which is dark, and then back to DataFlex, which is light, and then back to it becomes a bit of a ping pong between light and dark. Yeah, I find this to be a much calmer setup using the dark theme. And the best thing is that we didn't just make the editor a dark theme, we made the entire studio a dark theme. So all the toolbars, all the panels, all the lists, everything gets set into a dark mode. Do you want to see it?
Yeah, actually I do.
So in our DataFlex 2021 studio, we can go into Tools and then Configure Studio. And there is a checkbox here now that says Dark Theme. And when I click this and confirm, it will switch my entire studio from a glaring white theme, light theme, to this much calmer, dark theme. And mainly when working in the evenings or late nights, this is where this really shines.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I can see the appeal of it indeed.
For sure, for sure. So yeah, dark mode, DataFlex 2021. And I think with that, we've covered our 5 topics for today. Yeah. Now, a quick recap. Could you do that for us?
Yeah, of course. So we have the WebTagsForm, and additionally, we have the beautiful web HTML list, dynamic objects, now standard in the framework, and also the geolocation API. And of course, not to forget the dark theme.
The dark theme. All right. Thank you guys for watching. See you in the next one.
Well, that was a very nice presentation to watch. A good DO presenter, I think. Let's go to some questions. This is a really long one, so let me quote the complete message. I love the DataFlex report JSON safe import report definition. This solves many version control issues. Can this be exported on a command line, for example, for a Git differences converter? Also, can this be done on integration where all headings are changed to language prior to loading the report? Okay. And noted below is also answer offline via email or forum is fine. So I think let's go for that. Let's do that. We will answer offline in the forum. Next question. That one is for the panel. When will there be a text form for Windows? Bram, will this be in the Windows Love also? Will there be a text form?
Yeah, so the WebTagsForm, as previously said in the presentation, has kind of a lot of iterations. So we had a chance to try a lot of new things, also with the web framework. And just like the suggestion form, we are also looking for ways to implement this in the Windows version.
Okay, let's see. There's a lot more to come for Windows, I hear. Another question. Which HTML editor should I choose for my web project? Henry, can you answer that one?
Yeah, I think it depends what you want from the HTML editor, but in a vacuum, I'd have to say pick the Quill editor if you haven't included one in your project yet, mainly because it's the most recent iteration and the underlying component is free and open source, and it will probably get the most attention in future updates as well. So, short answer, pick the Quill editor.
The Quill editor. Okay, thank you. That's it for the panel for now. You can send in more questions using the contact information shown below. So if you have any more questions for the DataFlex panel, you can send it via the contact information below. Did I tell you before that there were a lot of Brazilian members that registered for the VIP lounge? Well, let's go to Samuel Pizarro.
Hello everybody, greetings from Brazil. I hope this video finds you well and healthy. My name is Samuel Pizarro, and most probably you have read some of my posts in the DataFlex forum. I really enjoyed our DataFlex community forum. It's a unique place. I started to work with DataFlex since release version 6, and I have passed through all the subsequent releases after that. Today, I work as a database administrator at IBM. I still work with DataFlex in a small projects for my church community. And there is one particular project, a web database project, that have been waiting for this moment since its conception. The requirement was to have a unique, a central website that could provide a multi-language environment for our community, where they could use their own language to search for the conference material. So the system is still under development, but it currently supports English, Spanish, and Portuguese due to the common set of character sets between them. So it's possible to have a multi-language system in DataFlex supporting these three languages. But now, oh my god, now the dream finally came true. We have Unicode. Yeah! Woohoo! This for sure is the most important feature that was released in DataFlex 21 for us and for this project. We can now extend our project to support another language, which will for sure benefit our community in other countries as well. That's awesome. We have been waiting for that for so long. I'm really excited about it. And for that, I just can say thank you, DAO, thank you, Data Access. And for my surprise, when reading the release during the test phase, I got surprised about another feature that was released as well that I was not expecting to. It's the WebTagsForm. Woo! That's another milestone. We use tags form all over the place. This is a common web usage. You can see tags form being used here and there, and everybody asks for this, and this project as well. So I got really excited when saw that DataFlex now support this natively and will make our lives easier. Well, DataFlex 21, we have been talking about you. Welcome to the party. That's it, guys. I wish you all success in your future projects with this most wanted release, DataFlex 21. Cheers, and I see you around.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Great to see how enthusiastic you are about DataFlex 2021. The next speaker of today is André de Vries, and he also created a few DataFlex Learning Center courses about migrating to DataFlex 2021. And today he will share his experience with upgrading HelpDesk Express to DataFlex 2021. So let's go to André.
Hello, my name is André de Vries, and I will be talking about migrating HelpDesk Express to DataFlex 2021. I've been talking about migrating to DataFlex 2021 a lot before in the DataFlex Learning Center course. In part 1, I've been talking about general aspects, so things that everyone has to do to migrate their application to 2021. And also about making your application fully Unicode and 64-bit. I won't go into detail about that today, because now I will be talking about an example, HelpDesk Express, and to show you what kind of things you have to do to migrate it to the new version. HelpDesk Express is a DataFlex-based online support tool for customers to report bug reports, product suggestions, and questions. And it's also in use by customers of us for their customers. It is currently running in 19.1 on a Microsoft SQL Server database, and it's a pretty large workspace containing 7 projects and 11 libraries. So the idea is now to migrate it to 2021 and then run it as 64-bit executable and being Unicode capable. First, I had to do a number of steps to migrate it. First, I had to remove the dynamic object library because I was using this in 19.1, but now since dynamic objects is an integrated part of the studio, I had to remove this library. Then all libraries were migrated to DataFlex 2021 individually, and compiler errors and warnings that I found have been resolved. Also, DataFlex Reports 8.0 is now being used, which goes with this new DataFlex version. The HDE workspace was completely migrated to DataFlex 2021, including the Web App Framework, which is now the 20.0 version. All projects were compiled 32 and 64-bit, and compiler errors and warnings were addressed. See the next slide. Then I had to move the reduction library and its implementation, because in 19.1 we added this for extra security, but since it's now also part of the framework, I had to remove the library and its implementation. Then there are a number of steps I had to take, which everyone would have to take to migrate their application. I've been mentioning this also on the Learning Center course, and it's good to have a view on that. First step that I took was to correct conversions between handle arrays and integer arrays, because those conversions do no longer work, but I did not find it in this application. Second is D-word corrections, because in the past D-word was a replacement for integer, and it was not fully correct. In other languages, such as C, it's a replacement for an unsigned integer. So in most cases it will just work, but for example, if you would have a test on a D-word variable being negative, yeah, that would make no sense anymore and would be wrong. I did not find such problems here. Then replace type structures by struct. Type is an obsolete way of defining a struct, and it doesn't work anymore because of Unicode. Then rewrite conversions between strings and pointers. Before, you could do a move from a string to a pointer, or reverse, but that is no longer allowed because of fundamental changes to the runtime due to the pointer type. To move a pointer to a string, you can now do a pointer to string function. This is a new function. I found one such problem. Then replace to OEM and to ANSI by to OEM, UTF-8 to OEM and UTF-8 to ANSI. To OEM and to ANSI still exist for backwards compatibility reasons, but they do not work as you would expect. You will have to use UTF-8 to OEM because the string type has now changed to UTF-8. Also, do not pass binary data using strings. This doesn't work anymore. Unicode changes. Well, we are using here a Microsoft SQL Server database, which supports Unicode, but that doesn't mean that it immediately works. You will still have to change columns from not being Unicode to Unicode columns, such as char. It has to be nchar, and you have to change varchar to nvarchar and text to ntext to be able to store Unicode characters. Then at the top of each source file, I put these two commands: compiler level warning all off and Unicode on. In this way, I will only see Unicode related warnings, and then I can address them because I really want to support fully Unicode, and I will have to solve the warnings that come up. For 64-bit, I did not have to do much. I obtained the 64-bit Lipsodium DLL, and of course also the 64-bit DataFlex Reports DLL, and then compiled it, and I found no 64-bit related issues. So that's done. Then I searched for some more possible problems, because before actually running it and then running into all kind of runtime errors, I'd like to know in advance if there are possible problems by searching for some keywords, such as address off. And I found one issue there. In this piece of code, you see the class ID from string function, which is a Windows function. It expects an address of a wide string, so a UTF-16 string. And Before we did this by a special custom function called str to white str. I don't know if this function really works in a new version of DataFlex 2021. I would have to check, but there's a much easier way now to do it. Just using the white string data type. This is a new data type in DataFlex 2021 for UTF-16 strings. And you can simply move a string to a white string. So that's done. Then I search for external function, because external functions, especially functions for Windows calls, they might have to be changed from the ANSI version to the W version, the white version. In this case, I did not have to do that because there were no such functions, so that's done. So then I tested it, and unfortunately, there were a lot of problems. I got runtime errors, things that did not work, and things not showing. But only a few of them were Unicode-related problems, and most problems were actually due to custom controls, because there have been quite a lot of changes in the web server, in the web framework, and these custom controls have not been adapted to those changes. And normally you would not have to worry about it, because the web framework changes are generally backwards compatible. But if you do lower level coding or augmenting functions or having custom controls here, those changes might break your application. So you really have to take into account those changes. For example, the web framework changed from a web service to a HTTP handler, which means that you don't have to use tweb value tree anymore. This has changed into JSON handles. So in HDE, we had a CWeb app augmented, and it had this code, where there was a string array, and it was serialized, and then passed along this function, but that no longer works. You should not pass a tweb value tree, but you can straight pass the string array. So that makes the code even easier. And it's actually wrong to do it in the old way. Another problem that I had was there was an error saying that a specific file did not exist. Well, the file did not exist, but also in 19.1 it did not exist. But it did not raise an error for that condition, because it then took another action. Turned out that there was a change in the CWeb Resource Manager package in the function custom download URL. A check has been added to this function to check whether the URL actually exists. So this part is new. Luckily, there is a PB allow invalid download URL property. So by setting this property to true, before calling custom download URL, I could resolve this problem. It now no longer complains that the file does not exist. A third problem, there were framework changes in CWeb base DEO and CWeb object in the function convert to transport. The first parameter is a handle now, but it used to be a string holding a property name. And this is for security reasons in the framework. So before, there was this string holding this PS value, but it had to be changed to a handle to this property. Another problem I ran into, this has to do with Unicode. I was sending a test email from the HDE application, and it failed due to an authentication problem. It turned out to be an incorrect password. But deep down, the problem actually was that there was a character function used, and it takes an integer as a parameter and then converts it to its character. But this no longer works for integers above 127. And this is because strings are now UTF-8. And a UTF-8 string is really different from an OEM string, which it was before. So the character function still only works for ASCII codes. Oops. Instead of using the character function, I could now use the uchar to string function, and this solves the problem. Okay, these were some examples where I ran into. This is a recent work. It's not quite finished yet, and there are still a few bugs in there, but only in custom controls. And generally, it works fine otherwise. Some takeaway messages. Pay attention to general changes that you must make. So changes, even if you don't aim for being Unicode capable or 64-bit, such changes you still have to make. Second is migrating to 64-bit was pretty easy in this case. It can be harder, but I think in many cases it's not so hard. Unicode changes were not frequent here, but they can be tricky. And last point is beware of custom controls for augmenting and special code, lower level coding, because of changes in the web framework. Well, that's it. Thank you for watching this presentation on migrating to DataFlex 2021.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Let's immediately jump into some questions we have for the panel. The first one, what did you have to do to get the DataFlex reports working in the HDE project? Andre?
Yes, well, not that much actually. I just had to switch the library from the version I had to the latest version, version 8, and that just worked. I didn't really have any issues with that.
Nice.
Great.
Yeah.
I see a lot of happy faces. Nice. Next question, does the value tree still work, or do we need to upgrade our custom controls as well? Harm, I think this is a good one for you.
Yes. Yeah, I just watched Andre's presentation, and he mentioned that he had a few issues with it. Well, the whole thing is we changed from using the value tree to using JSON handles, which gives a lot more flexibility, and in a few cases we're using variants. We all did this with backwards compatibility in mind. So basically, we assumed that you're using certain functions to build your custom controls, and that should all still work. But then, if you're going to augment or override framework functions, there's always a risk that we change something that's going to break it. So, well, the short answer is yes, it should still work.
Okay, well, thank you. Let's do one more question. Can a 64-bit application use a 32-bit ActiveX component? Andre?
Yeah, well, in general, you cannot mix 32 and 64-bit applications, but I think there is a way to do this. From a 64-bit application, you can run an external executable using the run program command. And this executable can be a 32-bit executable. So, and if that executable would then have a 32-bit ActiveX component, you will actually get this done. But any information that you would pass, you would have to go via transfer files or something like that. So, in theory, yeah, I think it will work.
Okay, great.
Basically, you're saying not within a single process. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, not within the same process, because you cannot mix 32 and 64-bit within the same process. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's it for the panel for now, but we will get back to them later on in the live stream. So if you have any questions, you can still answer them for the panel. For now, here in Holland, it's winter. It's cold, there's a lot of wind, even snow sometimes. But when you go to the exact opposite on the world, then you will end up somewhere in Adelaide. There the weather is very nice, and there they can light up the Barbie.
Hey Joseph, come over here while we're cooking this Barbie. Now, you're doing a bit of software development. What kind of environments do you normally use for business software?
So we happen to use quite a lot of different environments. We got Ruby on Rails, we got C#, we got a bit of Java and popular language like Golang, and of course DataFlex. Using them, we have a lot of different frameworks as well. So we switch between Angular and Vue and switch them depending on the client needs. And then obviously just the raw JavaScript when it doesn't need to be as heavy.
Nice, nice. So where do you think, when is a typical project where you said that's a DataFlex project, that's where it will excel? When would you wrap that up into a box?
So I find that choice comes down to when the customer, the business, is more focused on trying to just get a system in place that runs and works for them. That they're trying to deliver something that'll just solve their needs rather quickly and alleviate a lot of overhead with manpower and just work and get that going quick. But also with software that's expected to last the life of the company, and we're talking 10, 20, 30 years, that we've seen commonly with DataFlex, and have the ability that things that might have been written 10, 15 years ago to just modernize them today rather quickly when the new updates come out quite easily.
Nice. So you would have seen version 20, so you're pretty excited about that?
Of course, I've seen version 20. The first thing I saw in DataFlex version 20 was the dark mode in the IDE, and I'm sure we're all excited for that. Being able to use that at night there, not wake up the partner, so you know that's quite good. But of course, DataFlex 20 brings a lot of other things as well. It's the new libraries for security making the web pages quite easy when you have a bit more complex security requirements, so that when you have multiple levels of users but you only want to create one view, doing things there is a lot easier. There's a few new components which are good. Of course, you got 64-bit support now, so that's going to make, that's just making us future-proof and definitely bringing us into align with great things that we can do now.
Yep. And of course, Unicode, Asian market,
support,
the doorstep.
Yeah, Unicode internationalization and emojis, right? So yeah, we get to store all that stuff now, so that's going to be great. Yes.
Dynamic components, you've been using that a bit?
Yes, so dynamic objects has been one of the greatest things because that's removed needing to write custom stuff in JavaScript and using front-end frameworks where you didn't really want to use it, but to get that sort of dynamicness where you have all that stuff and then removes all that and keeps it in the framework and makes it very easy to maintain.
Excellent. Well, cheers, thanks for that. And thanks for watching. We're two blokes in a Barbie. And thank you. This is Marco and Joseph, and enjoy the new release. Cheers.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you, Marco and Joseph. I hope you also enjoyed the barbecue and the beers you were drinking. And I hope we can share some beers soon again as well on an event or something. A subject that is not often regular in the agenda of a DataFlex event is the development on the inner workings of the web app server. And with DataFlex 2021, work under the hood makes for better security, stability and performance of web apps. And Harm will tell more about it.
Hello, I'm going to be talking about improving the security, stability and performance of your web applications with DataFlex 2021. First, I'll look at some new features that we added to the web app server that allow you to better configure your server-side end of things. The first feature that I'd like to discuss that we added is the option to select a specific Windows account for your web app in Web App Server. So basically you can set up a Windows account and then configure a web app to run under that specific account. This allows you to fine-tune the rights that web app has on your machine, because it will only have the rights of that specific user. And it basically provides better separation when you have multiple web apps that are running on the same server. And of course you can use Windows authentication on SQL Server, and you might even be able to access network shares when you have a real user instead of run under a system account. I'll do a quick demo of this, and first I'll show you guys this tool. It's called Process Explorer, and in Process Explorer it basically shows a tree of all the processes that run on your machine. So here we see the web app server, and under the web app server we see two web apps that I have configured, web order and web order mobile, or standard samples, and both of them are having two processes. If you look at the username column, we see that all of them are running under the system account. The system account is the default account under which the web app server runs, and if you don't configure a specific user, it will use this account to run your web app processes as well. Now if I go to the web app administrator and to the web application properties for the web order application, we see this new option, Windows user. And if you check the checkbox, you can click the select user button, and now you can enter the credentials that you want your user to, your web app to run under. If you hit OK, it asks you to restart the web application, and hopefully it works. Now in the background we see the process is being stopped and freshly started, and now we see that the administrator also shows test was as the user, and if we go back to the process explorer, we see that now the web order runs under the test was user. So as said, this provides better security at your server end. There are, however, some requirements for the user account. It has to have certain group policies enabled. Log on as a batch job is one of them. Allow log on locally. And it has to have a functioning profile on your machine. We are working on a manual that will describe how to set up a separate user that has the minimal requirements needed. Some other improvements are in the SPLF area, and I'll just briefly discuss these. We now have two-way communication between the master server and the application server with SPLF, and basically the application server will now tell the master server when it's going to shut down, when it's going to stop. And this prevents error 500s from occurring, HTTP errors, because it's trying to send messages to a server that's not available. So basically this improves the detection of irresponsive servers as well. Another option that we added is to configure a maximum amount of processes per slave. You basically, when you configure a master-slave configuration, you configure on the master the size of your application pool, and then when it starts processes, for each application server, it will start a certain amount of processes, and it's determined by the wave ratio. So if you have one master that's one application server that's set with a weight of 2 and one with a weight of 1, and you set a pool of 6 processes, one will get 2 processes and the other one will get 4 processes. But now if you take one out of this pool, it will basically start all 6 processes on the one server, and that could cause this machine to overload. It can cause licensing issues with whatever drivers and things you might be using. And for that we added the option to also set an explicit limit of the amount of processes. So the max amount of processes is always respected. So it might mean that you have a pool of 10 processes configured on your master, but your slaves only allow 6 to be started. So that's other improvements that we added is we duplicated the maximum concurrent sessions option. It was already available at server level, but now you can also set it per web app. And that basically allows you to ensure that one web app doesn't take down an entire server anymore. So basically you set a limit of the amount of concurrent sessions that this application will handle at the same time. And if it gets above that, it will just ignore all traffic that comes in above this limit. When working with web services and HTTP handlers, your sessions are really short, so basically it's the amount of requests that it can handle simultaneously. That's in practice what it means. Another thing we did is we improved the automatic reload logic. Usually you configure your server to restart the processes every 24 hours or around midnight. And before it would bring down the entire application, stop all processes, and then restart them. And that has a little downtime in the middle. Now it just stops one process, starts another process, stops one process, starts another process until it has refreshed the entire pool. And basically it does all of this without downtime at all. And the last thing that we did is we improved the logic for when an attach to a process fails. When a request comes in into the web app server, it's going to assign this request to a specific process. When an error happens while this is done, the attach fails. And what it used to do is send back an error to the client. But usually this error is caused by something that went wrong before the request came in. It might have been a different session, it might be that something crashed on the server itself. We basically don't know. And if it finds out that something is wrong before any application code is executed, it will now go back, it will trash the process, and it will assign the request to the next process. So basically it will retry, I think only once, but that reduces the chance of running into errors when the process is left behind in an invalid state. So let's move on to the web app framework. On the web app framework, we also did several improvements, and one of the major ones is that we added a new security layer at the UI level. Basically what we found is that the web app framework does all security checks at view level. So when a call comes in and a user has access to a view, it will allow the call. If it doesn't have access, it will deny the call. But we found that there's also, of course, a lot of situations where a user has access to a view, but the developer has hidden parts of the view by setting PB_render to false. But then, using the developer tools, you could still mess around with those controls and see data that you shouldn't be seeing, and even access execute server code that you shouldn't be able to execute. So we added this new layer that basically, by looking at the PB_render, PB_visible, and PB_enable properties, just checks if the user is allowed to perform the operation that is about to be performed. It also stops communication between the data entry object and the data dictionary when a data entry object is hidden. We implemented this using a new web property type. We added a new web property type for this, and this is called the client protected web property. And the client protected web property is basically a client web property. So if you set the value, the value is sent to the client, so the client knows if it should hide or disable a control. But it also stores that value on the server in the web app server props table, like a server web property. And whenever you web-get the value, it doesn't use the value that is coming on from the client, it uses the one that's stored on the server. So you can rely on this server, on this value, that it's not being tampered with. So it's a lot more secure. And it works like any other web property. You just say web property equals client protected, and now it's a client protected property, and you can just web set and web get it. This security layer has the following API. There is the allow server action, which is the main procedure that's called to determine if a server action should be allowed. Subclasses of CWebObject actually augment this procedure, and you can augment it, but you should always forward send it, or at least unless you know what you're doing. The CWeb base UI object has the logic for determining if a control is visible or not. So it implements allow server action, and it determines if the control is hidden or disabled. There's actually a little more to it than just looking at the web properties of the control itself, because it can also be that one of its parent controls is hidden. So if a container like a group or a tab page is disabled or hidden, all the controls inside it are hidden, so it has to look at its parent objects as well. Then for the data entry object operations, we have properties that basically control if a control will update the data dictionary with new values, and there's a property that determines if it will read values from the data dictionary when it's hidden. And there's allow fill DEO and allow update DD. These are the actual messages you want to augment if you want to customize this logic. What I would like to add to this security layer. It's also available for older versions in the form of the redaction library. So if you run on 19.1 or 19.0 and you're not able to update to 20 yet, you can download the redaction library and use that to implement the same checks yourself. Just when you go to 20, there is no reason to use the redaction library. You can just throw it out and rely on the framework doing it for you. And then the last thing I would like to touch on is that in DataFlex 20, the web app framework is not implemented as a web service anymore, but it's implemented as an HTTP handler. And the HTTP handler gives us a lot more flexibility in parsing the request and generating the response, because it's all done in DataFlex code. And it basically allows us to make the request and response format more dynamic. What we had to do when we were still using a web service was to have, when a control wants to send a complex piece of data to the client, it had to serialize it into a value tree and send that value tree to the client. A good example of that is the web list. The web list would send the rows to the client, the TWeb row structs, and to be able to do that, it would have to convert it to a value tree, which is then sent to the client, and on the client, that's converted back into the usable format. Now, it just sends a JSON handle, and the JSON handle just points to a JSON object that has the right structure. And there's also APIs that work with variants, where you can just send a struct, and that struct will just be serialized to JSON directly. And in case of the web list, this actually reduces the amount of data that's sent back and forward with around 30 to 40%. And it also, that basically gives improves the performance, but it also improves the readability of the code, the data, and it simplifies things. So no more value tree in 20. The only thing where you actually see this change is if you open the web service dispatcher directly in the browser. So here I've opened the web service dispatcher.wso, and that's now not pointing to a web service anymore. It's pointing to an HTTP handler, and the HTTP handler just gives back this sample page. You can use this to test if you have configured your server properly, and it will tell you the framework version that's behind it. If you would do this with 19.1, you would get this web service description page, and if you click call action, you get the description of the message format. So you could also call it more secure, that it's not exposing the entire API here. So basically, the message is that we have made lots of improvements under the hood, and most of these you just get for free by just upgrading to DataFlex 20. And we have tried to make it, as painless as possible, because of course the Unicode and 64-bit conversion will cause enough pain. So you get these for free, and I think it's some really nice improvements that also show that we have spent time in other areas than just the main things in DataFlex 2021. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you again soon at one of our events.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice presentation. And we have some questions. We have received a lot of questions. So we're going to make a selection of which one we're going to answer. Let's start with this one. It's a message from Down Under. And he's saying that he's very excited about DataFlex 2021 and is watching the launch. Well, welcome. And unfortunately, I'm having to step in and out, and I'm missing some important pieces of the launch. Will there be a recording or a summary available afterwards? Yes, there will be a recording available. This one is now live, but you can always watch it back. So also the link that you've clicked for the live stream, it will be available to watch the live stream again. Next question for the panel. I see we have a changed panel. We have some additions to the panel, because we've also received a question about the dogs of Henry, because he had his dogs on the background of his computer and they wanted to see the dogs. So here you see the dogs of Henry with his girlfriend.
I had to hire my assistant for this one.
And it's actually mother and daughter, if I'm
mother and
right.
son, yes. Mother on the left and the son being obnoxious
So
on
that's
the
a
right.
nice addition to the panel. Let's go to the next question. DataFlex uses UTF-8 for strings. Many or all Windows API calls use UTF-16. How do we as developer deal with this? Harm, can you answer this question?
Yes, actually I can. We added a new string type to the language for this. It's called the W string or the wide string. And as soon as you move a regular string into a wide string, it automatically converts it from UTF-8 to UTF-16. So basically the wide string is a UTF-16 string, and then you can use that to communicate with your external APIs. And in a lot of cases, you can actually, if a external API takes a pointer to a string buffer, you can even just change that in the definition to a wide string, and it will automatically convert it to a pointer to that string buffer when external function is executing. That logic was actually in there with the regular string as well. One warning though, the wide string, the string functions do work on them, but before, for example, a mid or a pos executes, it will convert the wide string into a narrow string, into a UTF-8 string, and performs the operation, and then the result will be converted back. So it's very inefficient to use them for further string processing. So you should only use the wide string when talking to external APIs.
Thank you. And let's see the next question. What are unsynchronized web properties for? Harm, I think this is also a good one for you.
Yeah, well, I could definitely answer that. Maybe first I should explain what synchronized web properties are before I start making an attempt to explain what unsynchronized properties are. Basically, web properties are sent to the client, and as soon as they are changed, either on the client or using a website on the server, they become synchronized web properties. And that basically means that they are sent back and forth between the client and the server for each request, and that makes them pretty inefficient. And that's why we added an API, I think it's a function, unsync prop or unsync, that allows you to unsynchronize a web property, and that's just to make it more efficient. So basically what you can now do is you can web set a property to a new value, and then if you unsync it, the new value does get sent to the client, but the client will not send it back to the server with the next request. So it's basically an optimization.
Great. And I saw that the dogs of Henry were also very interested in the stream. Henry was playing the stream on the laptop and the dogs were watching. So that's fun. Well, thanks panel. I think we'll get back to you later because there were a lot of questions. So we'll see which one we will pick for later on. Thank you. We'll go further with the next presentation, and that's another behind-the-scene topic of the R&D team, because they changed over to a new, more modern tooling set for software development and project management. A specific change to the compiler would enable you to automate your own build management. Stephen Mealy will tell you more about it.
Hi, I'm Steve Mealy, and I'm here to talk about the command line compiler and how we use it to automate our build process on our build server. So I know that a lot of you have been with us for a number of years, and you're saying, well, wait a minute, haven't we had a command line interface to the compiler since, well, pretty much since the compiler's been around? And of course, the answer to that is yes. The standard compiler is dfcomp.exe, and if we look at the documentation, we can see that there's always been a way to start the compiler outside of the studio, and there have always been a very full set of command line options to control what the compiler does. Whether you want it to always recompile, what you want it to do when it hits an error, what kind of output file do you want, and how verbose should that be? What packages should it use? Should it consider itself just inside the workspace, or should it use the defaults that are out in the registry? Everything's always been there for a lot of years, and it works great. You've used it, we've used it, but so why do we have a new one? That's really the question. Well, when we began the project for automating our build server, it was actually, we wanted a tool that was created and optimized for that purpose. So we used the same compiler guts. It's not a new compiler, it's just a new wrapper, but it's a new interface to that wrapper that is specifically created to output to the console. It It raises an error when exiting. There are, of course, now in DataFlex 2021, 32 and 64-bit versions. And by the way, those versions will always produce output that is matching the architecture. So the 32-bit compiler will produce 32-bit EXEs, and likewise for 64. And the command line interface is extremely similar to the one for DFComp, so it's not a lot of new things. But we've used this for a couple of years now because we've actually been using it ever since the 19.1 project, even though it was designed to be a part of DataFlex 2021. So what does it look like? Well, we can open up a console and just type the DFComp console /?, the universal symbol for is there help for this thing, and it gives you everything you need to know about how to use it. What the command line looks like, what the options are, how to turn them on and off, and it's pretty much the same thing that you've been used to. Of course, the same thing happens in the 32-bit version. So it's a great new tool, and it's been serving us extremely well for a couple of years now. And the reason it's serving us really well is what I really want to spend more time on today is talking about build automation and the role that this new compiler plays in our build automation strategy. So, as I'm sure a lot of you have very complex projects, we have extremely complex projects. What do we build? We build an amazing array of C components: the runtime, the compiler, the web app server, the registration utility, the SQL drivers, the COM class generator, the editor, the FlexML engine, the JSON parser. It goes on and on and on. And that's just the C components. Then there's all the DataFlex components: the Studio, Database Builder, Database Explorer, Flex errors, all the little minor utilities, all the wizards, all the examples. And then, of course, there's the installers. We have the Studio installer, we have the web app server installer, and we have the Windows client installer. So a ton of different things. And we had, in our old methods, some probably familiar sounding issues. So it started with who builds what? Well, as with a lot of larger teams, certain team members kind of owned certain components. So, John Toohey would work on certain things, and Harm would work on certain things, and I would work on certain things, and Martin, and all the different team members had kind of areas of responsibility. So, of course, you'd work on your local machine to build those areas of responsibility, and then we would check stuff in. There was a C repository, and that's where all the source to the C components would go. And then there was a DataFlex repository, and that was the DataFlex source. But then also in that DataFlex repository, we had the C components built, so that when you were checking out things of the DataFlex repository, it was all of the DataFlex source plus all of the recently built object files for the C components. So, and then it was just that last process of getting all of the latest source out of the DataFlex repository and running that final manual build process that put everything all together and then put them into installations. Of course, there were a lot of issues with that process, and even though it served us very well for years and we brought out a lot of great products with it, there were still, and especially as time went on, things got a little bit more critical as Microsoft changed the way they did things. So the issues were the variations in all these local build environments. We had 2 or 3 people building C components, but maybe their Windows got updated, or they were working on a different Windows, or Microsoft put out an update, or there was a slightly different updated version of Visual Studio, or the libraries that we used, all the different pieces that we bring together to make the product. And so we'd have all these different variations in the build environments, and sometimes local files would get out of sync. You always want to make sure that did you get the latest from source control? And of course everybody says, yeah, I did, but human beings are human beings, and sometimes things don't happen exactly as smoothly as you planned. And then there were a lot of manual steps, and those manual steps are prone to variations of themselves, and that produced texting inconsistencies. And there was just this excessive overhead to try and coordinate all these team members that had these responsibilities. And especially when you looked at our geographical diversity, it could be like, oh, I needed something from Martin, but Martin's asleep and he won't be up for another 6 hours. So lots of different issues, and I'm sure these are not unfamiliar sounding to you. So with build automation, we have this single build server. It's a consistent, controlled environment. Nobody touches the operating system. Nobody upgrades the tools. Nobody does anything unless it's discussed, researched, planned, and tested. So you just don't have any questions about what's happening to all the pieces. It's always based on the latest source code because part of the build process is to always get the latest source code. There's nobody to forget. It happens the same way every time. It gets the C components, it gets the DataFlex source, it gets the documentation, it gets the installer source, and it always builds every component. Well, that's a slight exaggeration because if there are no C changes, then it kind of skips to the next big section. So only if there are any C changes does it go through the entire C build process. But even if there's only one change in the compiler or one change in the runtime, it builds all of the C components. And then it builds all the DataFlex components. And then it gets all the latest documentation. And then it compiles all the different installers. And so what this results in is complete, consistent, installable builds or error emails and what happened. And so, and the DataFlex compiler, the command line compiler, plays a very key role in here. And let's take a look at, like, one of the things that we didn't always do on a most consistent basis was, you know, that when you install DataFlex, you can pick one of a few different local languages, so that, and then it compiles the different packages and things like that, and has error files that based on that language. And so one of the things that we do now in our automated build process is, instead of expecting the various people in QA to install different languages and make sure everything works, it goes through and just gets them all. It gets all the different languages, it compiles everything, and it basically makes the reasonable assumption that if it compiled, then it's probably going to be okay. There are no syntactical errors in what we checked in. Of course, the actual translations themselves have to make sense, and that's done by human beings, of course. But we don't have to worry about missing, you know, because the Czech language, we checked in the wrong thing, and it, no pun intended there, we put the wrong thing in source control, and it wouldn't compile anymore. So here's an example of how we use the build, the command line compiler in the build server. So what else do we use to get this whole environment together? Well, we use Jira. Jira, I don't know if all of you are familiar with Jira, but it's a wonderful tool, and it basically allows you to log issues, whether they're new features, improvements, bugs, coordinate all of those issues into projects and then releases. It gives you a workflow, a consistent workflow of how you take any particular issue from the time it's logged until the time it gets into a product and into a release, and the various cycles that it can do through there. It gives you that consistent workflow, and what's really nice is from Jira, we actually create the Git branches that then work through and are the source code control and the rest of the build processes. So for Git, what we use are Bitbucket and Tower. That's our source control system. It's all Git based. And then we use this wonderful little tool called Jenkins. It's a build server. Now, when I talk about Jira, Bitbucket, Tower, and Jenkins, those are what we use. There's lots of tools, lots of software out there that can play these roles, and I'm not trying to sell you on any particular company's product. I'm just saying that this is what we use, and it does a wonderful job for us. One of the great things about how this all works together is whether that issue starts out maybe in HDE. Maybe it's something that one of you have reported as either something that you'd like to see in the product, or a problem that you're having, or documentation that's not clear enough, whatever it is. So you report that either in the forums or in HDE, and then it goes from there all the way into Jira, and then Jira will, you know, help us create a branch in source control, and the branch will get, you know, accepted and merged, and then that'll happen on the build server, and we have this thread that goes through that entire process, so we can see from anything that's actually compiled into the product or documented in the product all the way back, that consistent thread from the very initial report or idea. So when can we do this build? You say, oh, I made a build process. Well, when do you do that? Well, we can go into Jenkins at any time and just say, I want to build now. And when you say that on demand, it'll go through and do all of the same things that it does if it's going to do it on its own, which is it does nightly. So this same process happens whether you go in and say, I want one now, or it happens every single night. And the first thing it does at night, it says, wait a minute, do I have any changes? It goes and it checks the C source. If there's any change, it gets that. And then it runs all of the C compilation. And then it says, okay, the next project downstream is the DataFlex source. And so it goes and it says, are there any DataFlex changes? And if there are, it checks those out and it compiles everything. Actually, even if there aren't any DataFlex changes, if there are upstream C changes, it still runs the DataFlex build process. So C changes are kind of like the king of the build process. Anything that changes there will trigger the entire build process, all the way through to making the installers. If there are no C changes, then it jumps in and at the DataFlex point says, are there any there? And if so, then it goes all the way through to the end to the installers. If there aren't any DataFlex changes, no new builds. So of course there are nights that nothing happens because we haven't checked in any C changes and we haven't checked in any DataFlex changes or new documentation. And the great thing is we have this build history, so we can see any night that there's a build or any time one of us triggers a manual build, what went on. And so let's kind of take a look at that build history and see what it might look like. So this is the actual build history from the release, the last few days of the life of DataFlex 2021. And we can see that on March 10th, there was build 130, and that was when we went, no, wait a minute, we just released the product and there's this change in the release, in the README, and we don't want it to be in there because it looks a little hanky, so let's do a new build. And of course, we had already had, in the 4 days since we locked down on March 6th, there were some doc changes, and we thought, oh, well, let's get them in there too. So we can see everything that happened, what day, and you can see that there are, detail links in here. Those would take us all the way back through Jenkins and then back into Bitbucket and back into Jira, back into HDE, and we can see everything that happened and actually have, reasonable documentation. This is where we get our change logs. This is where we make sure that everything that is in a new build has been documented some way. And then we can drill down into that detail and see that, okay, for that particular change, these are all the files that were impacted. Now, these happen to be just the documentation files and a README, so it's kind of very basic of what happened here. But had this been a change that involved source code, all of the modules that were changed in that change, that were modified in that change would be listed, and you could drill down into each and every one of them, see the differences, see who changed what, see who approved the change, see any comments that happened along the way. I mean, it's really a game changer in how you can have a controlled, consistent, workable build process. So there were some things we had to get used to in bringing this new build process into place. First of all, we had to trust the process. And the key to that trust is that you now know that there is a single controlled environment that built every single piece of the product. Back prior to this build server, you had to wonder, okay, well, if I got a new compiler from person X, I better test the compiler a lot because I don't know, did something happen on their local machine that might have changed what was produced? When you have a build server, it's the same thing every single time. And of course, unless there are no C changes, then it's only some things. Another change we had to get used to was that because it's happening a lot and because everything is being compiled as part of a process, that the build server always increments that last segment of the revision. So, the revision numbering is major.minor.release.build. And so all the C components, like if you look at any particular build that you've installed over since 19.1, you'll notice that unlike the past, every single thing that was built in C has that same last build number. And every single DataFlex component has that same last build number. And that was just a change from how we did things in the past. So, bottom line is, it was a big investment, and we didn't put this thing together overnight. It was a lot of trial and error, a lot of just the changing over to using Jira and Git and Bitbucket and Tower, let alone Jenkins, was a big investment. But the return on that investment has been truly amazing. So, if you haven't automated your build process, something to consider. And I hope this has been enlightening for you, and thank you for your time.
Okay, Stephen, and that is the last presentation for this event. We'll go over a few questions, which also will be the last questions we will discuss with the panel. And the first question is, I would like to know if this version supports Node.js, and also if we can create an app to work in offline mode. Harm.
Yes.
Can you answer the question?
Yeah, I can try. Well, it sounded like you were breaking up a little, but no worries. So the question was, does the current version support Node.js? Yeah. Well, the answer to that is pretty much no. We didn't do anything specific to support Node.js. So yeah, there's no more support for Node.js as there was in the previous version. We do keep track of technologies like Node.js. I actually played around with it the other day, and it's a pretty cool environment. And we are, of course, making plans for the future, and yeah, we're definitely looking at technologies like that to define where we are going with DataFlex. So, and the other part of the question, offline support is definitely high on our wish list, but yeah, we don't have anything that we can promise you yet. But it's we're keeping track of where the world is going, and cool things like Node.js, and we'll hopefully bring you a lot of cool stuff in the future. Yeah.
Okay. Looking forward to the future then. And he also wanted to congratulate all of you with DataFlex 2021. Let's see, the last question. And I think, Stephen, this one will be for you. You have the honors of the last question of today. Is there any guidance on how we can find the maximum number of sessions that a web app can handle? Stephen.
Well, that's an interesting question. It's kind of there's a lot of different layers to that, so I'll try and go through them really quick. The first thing is that, remember, when you set up a web app, you really want to use process pooling. And so you've got these processes sitting there, and they're taking request response cycles as fast as they can handle. So you could have a lot of people in your web app, but remember, with human latency, shall we say, it only needs to do a request response when they click another button or drill down into something or something like that. So trying to look at people to requests is an interesting match. But that said, what you really want to do if you're expecting a lot of load and you want to make sure you size your system right, the only really way to try and do that is with a stress test environment. You can get a lot of users to try and bang on it real quick, but that's not so good. But a tool that we've came across is called Westwing Web Surge, and it allows you. It's a pretty easy interface and allows you to kind of set up a test environment. And again, it doesn't really allow for that latency thing, but you can kind of get a feel for how many requests different processes can handle. There's of course a lot of different tools out there. You could use JMeter. You could use a lot of different things. JMeter is a little geekier, a little harder to set up, but basically always use process pooling and try and set up some way to stress test in as human way as possible, so that you're not just banging away and saying, oh, it's not going to handle it, because you've got people pausing.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. And then this is the last question for you, for the complete panel. Thank you for being available today and answer all of these questions. And for all the viewers at home, thank you for sending in the questions to the panel. And thank you for sending in the questions. We have received a lot of questions, and you can still send questions to the info@dataaccess.eu email address, and we will make sure that you get answers to your questions. Okay, then we have one more thing to do. There was a VIP lounge, and you could register for this lounge. But at this moment at the event, we want to open up the VIP lounge for every single one watching, with a maximum of 250 people. So I do have to mention that. You can go to the VIP lounge by going to the link that is displayed above me. And it will look like this. I will guide you shortly through what the VIP lounge looks like. This is what you will see, and when you first enter the lounge, you will be joined in the DataFlex Launch room. This is the room, and there is a maximum of 50 people to one room. So make sure that when you enter that room, please skip to the next room, so there's room for more people to come. And you just skip to a next room to click on a room. And as you can see, we're now in the VIP lounge. And you can put on your mic and your webcam. Now we don't have a mic and a webcam on, but please put it on, because that's a better way of communicating with each other. And here you see Portuguese flags and a Brazilian flag, and that means that there will be someone available that will talk Portuguese or Brazil. So you can talk there. You can zoom in and out to get closer to people and move away from people. And you can also move through the room, like that. And you can also search for persons. You can search, for example, here we will search for Nick, and you will see him pop up. And when you click on Nick, you will go to where he is at. So for example, if you really want to chat with Nick, just search him up and you will go to where Nick is at. And as you can see now, Nick is pretty big on the screen, but if we move away from Nick, he's getting smaller, and that means that you can also not hear him that good. So when you're close to people, you can hear them very good and you can chat with each other. And when you move away from them, then you can't hear them anymore. So just like you're in a normal room chatting. And that's the basics we wanted to explain about the VIP room. You can see Janine joining as well. She's also in the VIP room, and the DataFlex panel will enter the VIP room as well. So if you have questions for them, also enter the VIP room. And as you can see, drink some beers at the bar. And talking about drinking beers at the bar, of course, that's something we miss with the usual events, the edux, the synergies, the scandux. It's always nice to see each other in real life. And of course, at this moment, we can't see each other in real life, but I hope we can do that soon. And when you're at a live event of Data Access, the chances are that you will also see the DataFlex band. And they have written a song for us as well today. And that is what we want to show you now at the end of the event. And the lyrics of the song are based on a true story. Because a Danish government body needed a new web application, and the next morning at 8 a.m., the solution was already ready to use. So we want to thank you very much for attending this event today. We thought it was really fun to have this party together with you. And I think you should also go to the VIP lounge and drink a beer together, chat with each other there. But of course, after seeing the DataFlex band. So let's go to the DataFlex band, and thank you for being with us today.
Urgent situation, kingdom for an application. Don't drag on, get it done. DataFlex of 2021. When your web page needs reshuffling, right IT present the problem. Fixed by 12, not a chance in hell. Well, cut it short and get it done yourself. I know my database, I need new UI. Web service interface, I want it to turned one spaghetti. Here's a clue, start anew. Data access calm is meant for you. Data access calm is meant for you.